So we're gonna start with Daniel chapter 1 now, and let me just actually begin by pointing out. Actually, I have on page, and I don't cover everything in the notes. If you so I don't, you'll see the way I do this. On page 6, there's a little note by Sir Isaac Newton on the importance of Daniel. Sir Isaac Newton wrote a commentary on Revelation and Daniel. Is that not amazing? If you go to the Institute of Creation Research in Dallas, they have at the beginning. How many of you have been in there? And they have like that hologram area where all the pictures and they start talking to you from the okay. And the first person they have speak there is Sir Isaac Newton. And there are people who consider him to be the most significant scientist ever. And Sir Isaac Newton wrote, it's on page 12 of this book. I think this is fascinating. Daniel was in the greatest credit amongst the Jews till the reign of Roman Emperor Hadrian. And to reject his prophecies is to reject the Christian religion. That's a pretty strong statement. And then he says, for this religion is founded upon his prophecy concerning the Messiah. So the greatest scientist ever, or certainly one of them, said Christianity, all of it, is based on what Daniel said. That's a pretty significant statement from one of the most brilliant people who ever wrote, whoever was a scientist. That's really significant. So we're going to look at that, and I think you're going to grow. I know you're going to grow. So the book opens in Daniel 1:1. It says, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So one of the things about Daniel, and you'll see this when we get later in the book, like to chapter 9, is the amount of stuff that has to do with timing. Like the timing of Daniel is like he's prophesying this is going to happen and that's going to happen. Like most of us are familiar with this idea of some kind of a 7-year tribulation, right? And we go to the book of Revelation. And let me just tell you that if you didn't have the book of Daniel, there is absolutely no hope at all, no matter what you do with the book of Revelation, to ever come to the conclusion that there is a 7-year period. Completely absent from the book of Revelation. What you will get from the book of Revelation is again and again and again this idea of 3.5 years. And what you will not get out of the book of Revelation is the idea that there are 2 separate periods of 3.5 years. And you need the book of Daniel to get that. Without the book of Daniel, there's no place to get, no place in the Bible to get anything like that. It takes the book of Daniel. So timing is really important. And this book opens with some statements about timing. Now, it mentions the third year of this reign of the king of Jehoiakim. So what happens in history is Babylon submits after David, and then you have Solomon, and then the kingdom splits under Rehoboam, and then you end up with the kingdom of Israel, and you end up with the kingdom of Judah. And by the time you get to the 6th century, you end up with King Nebuchadnezzar submitting. The northern kingdom's already gone. Assyria conquered them. But he submits the southern kingdom to 3 exiles. Most people don't realize there's 3 of them. People think there's only 1 exile. He actually does 3 exiles. The first one is in the year 605. This is just history, 605 BC. And Daniel's a part of that one. The second one is in 597 BC. And Ezekiel is a part of that one. They are contemporaries, these 2 prophets. And then the third one is the one that everybody's familiar with, 586 BC, and the temple gets destroyed. Now, people will read this book of Daniel, and they'll try to figure out verse 1, and it is, to be frank, it's hard to figure out verse 1. And here's why. It mentions, for example, the third year of the king of the reign of Jehoiakim. But that's not really meaning the third year. Let me tell you what it actually is talking about. What happened was, in the 6th century BC, you've got these two major powers. You've got Babylon, which is northeast of Israel, and you've got Egypt, which is southwest. Pharaoh Necho wants to go to war against Babylon. So he starts coming up through Israel to attack Babylon. Josiah, who's considered one of the best kings that Israel ever has, wants to side with Babylon. And so he comes out to fight Pharaoh Necho. Pharaoh says, "Don't get involved. This is not a problem for you. I'm not after you." And Josiah, for whatever reason, decides he's going to do it anyway. Well, Pharaoh kills Josiah. And then Pharaoh takes Josiah's son and makes him king over Judah. And he doesn't really want to destroy Judah. And so he makes him king over Judah, and he basically makes Judah subservient to Egypt. Well, 8 years go by like this. And then Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon gets control over Judah. And during that time, now this says it's 3 years. During that third year, the third year of Jehoiakim's subservience to Nebuchadnezzar, during that third year, okay, that's what this is referring to. But it's actually not even the third year. It depends on how you count the years. So if you'll notice, if you go over to page 2, near the bottom of the page, you see how all that stuff's there. Why is all that stuff there? Because there are some people who care about, where'd you get this from? Where's that at? So it's all there, okay? Babylon and Israel counted time differently. Babylon counted time by saying the year that a king comes into office or into the throne, that is not his first year. That is the year of ascension. Israel counts that first year as the first year. And so what you end up with then is Jeremiah says it's the fourth year, because it is the fourth year. But according to Babylon, it's the third year after the year of ascension. You see the point? So it's actually all lining up exactly the same, but it's going to get really confusing. And Daniel, because he's basically going to spend almost his entire life in Babylon, is going to account time not according to the way that Israel counts time. He's going to count time according to the way that the Babylonians count time, because that's where he's at. So all this timing stuff does seem to really matter. On page 3. Why should we even really care so much? Give this kind of effort to understand timing in the book of Daniel. Well, this is a huge debate among the scholars. And it can impact. There's Gianna back there. She's the head lady. Thank you. Are there more copies? If you need a copy, just go ahead and raise your hand and we can get them to you. We want you to have them. So if you just kind of leave your hand up while she brings them around, and I'll continue. Thank you. And thanks, Gianna. So why should we care? Because this is what happens with the book of Daniel. There is this huge debate, and it's really huge. When was the book of Daniel actually written? In fact, when I went to seminary, about 1994, everybody in the Old Testament theology class was given an assignment to write a paper on when was Daniel actually written. So this is a big deal, okay? Because this is a really significant book. And so when was this book written? Okay, well, during the 19th and 20th century, this contention started to happen. It actually started for the first time in 1806. And we got one more over here, maybe? Thank you. So, well, when she comes in, I'll ask you to raise your hands again. So in 1806 was the first time that somebody came up with this idea that Daniel may not have been written in the 6th century BC. It may have been written in the 2nd century BC, much later. Okay, and so, and today there is near consensus. It's hard to find a commentary that is written today. There are some, but it's hard to find a scholarly commentary that is written today that says that Daniel was written in the 6th century, and they're almost all going to put it in the 2nd century BC. That's like 400 years later. Keil and Delitzsch, they wrote like 100 years ago. They're Messianic. Delitzsch is a Messianic Jew, and they say 6th century. Art Scroll, which is a non-Messianic Jewish publication, it's very orthodox. It'll say 6th century. Sansino will say 6th century. But I've probably landed on this place where I have decided that in my mind, and I'll explain why, the date of authorship is an argument that we don't need to be concerned with. It's a big argument, but we actually don't need to be concerned. Okay, let me help you see why we don't need to be concerned. Look at Ezekiel, how it opens on page 3. Ezekiel chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, of the 5th day of the month, that I, see the first person? So who wrote this? Ezekiel wrote it. I was among the captives of the river of Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God on the 5th day of the month, which was in the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity. The word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel. It just switched. It switched person. The priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was upon him. What happened? You see that? So this shift from the first person to the third person shows you pretty good, strong evidence that what you probably have here is that Ezekiel, just talking about Ezekiel for a moment, but it's going to matter, okay? Ezekiel, apparently as a prophet and a writer, wrote down what he wrote down, and then the community of faith, probably not one person, probably the community of faith, worked on what he wrote and developed it into what we eventually call the book of Ezekiel. Last year, at one point, Greg asked me at some point, and maybe I could say something about the timing of Psalms and how this kind of all relates to that. And this explains why things get written and worked on. And Ezekiel just becomes a really good example of that. You're kind of stuck with this idea that it switches person. So this idea that Ezekiel had this like transcendental moment where God took him over and forced him to write these words. That's not how God created the Bible. What God did was much bigger than that. He gave events to an individual, and then he gave events to the community. And if you study textual criticism, you end up with this situation where the community of the faithful created under his influence, created what we now have and call the Bible. This does not in any way diminish the significance of what we will call inspiration. The Bible is the inspired word of God. We're not doubting that at all. We're talking about how the inspired word was put together by God and given to people. You see the point there? And that's what happens with Ezekiel. So why would we not expect a very similar process with the book of Daniel? They are contemporaries, literally contemporaries. They may or may not know each other, we don't know. But they are fully contemporaries. In my opinion, on the bottom of page 3, the strongest case for an early authorship, 6th century BC, is the fact that the idea of a late authorship was never a consideration by anybody in all of history until 1806. 2,350 years after the traditional date of authorship. That's strong evidence for an early date. In my opinion, the strongest case for a late authorship, 2nd century. late authorship, not of all of it, but of the final product. The strongest evidence of the idea that it has a late authorship of the final product is the fact that half of the book is literally written in the third person. I'm going to page 4. Notice this. In the first 6 chapters of Daniel, there is no claim of Daniel saying, I wrote this. It's all third-person stories. Isn't that interesting? All of it. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. That doesn't sound like he wrote it. Daniel 2:14. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch. That doesn't sound like he wrote it. Daniel chapter 3, he's not in it at all. His 3 friends are in it. But he obviously didn't write. He's not mentioned once in it. Okay? Daniel chapter 4. But at last Daniel came before me. His name is Belteshazzar. Oh, it doesn't sound like he wrote it. You come to Daniel chapter 5. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge and understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas was found in this Daniel. It doesn't sound like he wrote it. Daniel chapter 6. Now when Daniel knew that when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. It doesn't sound like he wrote it. But then you come to chapter 7. This is the same picture of the contemporary of Ezekiel. You come to chapter 7 and something changes. Chapter 7, Daniel spoke saying, I saw in my vision. That might be first person because it says Daniel spoke. It could be. He didn't say I spoke. First it starts with Daniel spoke. It's like this hand, like more than one hand right there, perhaps. Okay? But this is the end of the count. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts. It looks like maybe we're switching, but when you get to Daniel chapter 8, it's some obvious first-person accounts by Daniel. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel. Looks like he's writing now. See the picture? Daniel 9, verse 2. In the 1st year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood. In Daniel chapter 10, verse 1, it opens with the 3rd person, but it quickly turns to the 1st person account for the rest of the chapter, and the switching between the 1st and the 3rd person is very similar to what Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 does. Okay? And that vision of Daniel chapter 10 continues to the end of Daniel chapter 12. It is all in the 1st person. Daniel chapter 12, verse 5, the last chapter. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood 2 others, one on this riverbank and the other on that riverbank. So this idea of it having more than one, that's quite possible. That fits Ezekiel. And really, if you're going to say Daniel wrote it all, I want to suggest to you, the burden is on you now to explain why he does not claim to have written the first 6 chapters. You have the problem. But if you're going to say that he did not write the last 6 chapters, then you have the problem, because it does say he wrote it. So this idea that there's more than one person, that really fits the scripture now. Okay, so recognize this. There are some great conservative Bible-believing scholars who fully accept Daniel's miraculous prophetic gift, even though they also date the book in the 2nd century BC. No problem there at all. It has thus, this is a Word Biblical Commentary, very conservative. It has thus been a matter, does someone need a handout? So what I'm, right here, we got one, thank you. It has thus been a matter of controversy whether the book was written in the 6th century and look forward to the events up to the 2nd century, or perhaps written in the 2nd century and look back on the events going back to the 6th century. In other words, did he predict it? Or is he interpreting it looking back? But no matter what you do, you're going to end up with Daniel prophesying, predicting the future, because in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is going to directly say that what's going to happen in the last days is going to be a fulfillment of what Daniel said. So there's no question about whether or not Daniel predicts the future. That's not a question at all. The question simply is, what is Daniel doing in in his visions? Is he looking back or is he looking forward? But Jesus plainly says this is coming. See the picture? Can you see why I said, I think you will learn the Bible in ways that will surprise you if you stay with this. Okay, so what is the book of Daniel about? The first 7 chapters are about the faithfulness of the Judeans to God under pagan rulers. And the last, from chapters 8 through 12, notice I didn't say chapters 1 through 6. It's chapters 1 through 7. And then in Daniel's 8 through 12, it's about the complementary theme of faithfulness under persecution. And it is kind of interesting that it's not 1 to 6, it's 1 to 7 and 8 to 12. And then let's complicate it. If that's not complicated enough, let's make it more complicated. Daniel is one of those few books of the Bible that actually is in the Old Testament that's not all Hebrew. It has significant Aramaic portions. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1, through chapter 2, verse 3, and then chapter 8, verse 1, through the end of chapter 12 are written in Hebrew. But in the middle, in Daniel chapter 2, verse 4, through Daniel chapter 7, verse 28, that's Aramaic. So you got Hebrew, and then you got Aramaic, and then you got Hebrew. And the language transition does not match the thematic transitions. And there is literally no widely accepted scholarly explanation, nothing. No one can explain why the languages are not matching, the language transitions are not matching the thematic transitions. We can see why it would start in Daniel chapter 2, verse 4, when Nebuchadnezzar starts speaking. So that's, okay, maybe that's why for that, but it still doesn't fit the thematic change. So there's no widely expected explanation. Daniel is arguably, I will say easily arguably, the most challenging book of the Bible to study. I think you're already starting to see that, right? There's no book of the Bible that is as challenging as this book to study. The difficulties with the book, when was the book written? There are linguistic difficulties. Is that a Hebrew word? Is that an Aramaic word? It has some Persian words in it. Where they're coming from. It has some Greek words in it. Where are they coming from? Did Greece even exist? Did the language even exist when Daniel was written? So it's got linguistic difficulties. There are difficulties in nailing down for certain who some of the key people in the book are. Then the second half of the book is all about eschatology. Obviously, it's going to really go into eschatology like no other book of the Bible. I'll say in Revelation chapter 4, you probably have this picture of the rapture, if you're familiar with it, chapter 4 and 5. And then chapter 6 through 18 is all chapter 6 through 18 of the book of Revelation is all about the Great Tribulation period. So you got, how many chapters is that? 12 or 13 chapters describing 7 years? That's details. Daniel doesn't give those details. Daniel is not giving the trees, Daniel's giving the forest. And if you don't study Daniel, you will guaranteed make mistakes because you'll be making decisions based upon the trees and the details of the book of Revelation, but you will get the forest wrong. Daniel's the key. Okay, so the second half of the book is all about eschatology, and let's make it even harder because Gabriel tells Daniel this book is going to be sealed until the time of the end. In other words, God said, if you think you understand this book before the time of the end, you are deceived. God said that, right? But many people would say, we are now in the time of the end. And there's a lot of good, strong reasons for believing that now. The Dictionary of Old Testament Prophets, it's a really good scholarly book. Kind of hard to read. It says this, despite its relative brevity, 12 chapters, it has exerted considerable influence upon those who recognize the book of Daniel as scripture. It looks like there's only 5. There was an editorial thing the computer did. There's actually 6. It had great influence upon early Jewish tradition, number 1. Influence upon the New Testament, number 2. Influence upon the patristic period, that is number 3, the early church fathers. Number 4, influence upon the medieval period. Number 5, influence upon the Reformation period, Martin Luther, Calvin. Number 6, influence upon the historical critical study. That's the idea of when was the book written and all of that kind of stuff. Page 6. The book of Daniel has far more significance than the modern church gives it. To put it in context, I already read you what Sir Isaac Newton said, but before that on that page 6, Qumran. Qumran was a sect of Judaism that many associate with John the Baptist. There's been people wondered, it was John the Baptist at some point perhaps part of Qumran. Probably not, but it was so, his thinking, his words, his theology were so similar to Qumran that it really gives credence to legitimately discuss, was he a part of Qumran? Okay? Well, there are more copies of Daniel at Qumran than any other book of the Bible, including Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So what I'm saying is the book of Daniel was the most significant book in the world, the faith world of the first century. This is the book. This is why Isaac Newton will say, our faith is built on this book. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Okay, that's all verse 1. It's 5 o'clock. Let's go to verse 2. We're not even. I have no sense of I need to do all of this handout today. I don't feel if we don't, we won't. We won't, because there's so many really good things. Some of the best stuff is actually the more devotional stuff. This is still the nitty gritty stuff. Okay. Chapter 1, verse 2. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his, Nebuchadnezzar's, hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. So it says some. So Nebuchadnezzar brought some of the articles of the house. So he didn't take everything out of the temple. According to Jeremiah, the pillars. He did not take the sea, the brazen altar. He did not take the carts. He did not take all the remainder of the vessels. And Jeremiah said that whatever he took would be returned. And it says that he brought them into the land of Shinar. Shinar is a word that basically means the country of 2 rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. The Talmud says that the place was called Shinar because the dead of the flood were deposited there on account of the low-lying terrain. So the next indentation, and our Rabbi Simeon ben Lachish said, and you'll notice, why is it called Shinar? For all the dead of the flood were shaken out of there, bracket. The word for shaken out there shares consonants with Shinar, end bracket. That's from the Talmud. Okay, and you'll notice that that is Neusner's translation of the Talmud. So when you see that in the Talmud and you'll see brackets like that, what that's saying is that that translation of the Talmud, that publication of it, Neusner put things like, and that bracket, he put that in there to help you read, to understand what it says. So Neusner's saying that's what this is talking about. The word shaken shares consonants. You know, y'all know what a consonant versus a vowel. Shares consonants with the word Shinar, so shaken, so that's where they're getting the theology from. One of the things that is interesting, and it will become very significant in Daniel chapter 10, is this idea of, notice this word God in verse 2. The articles of the house of God, capital G-O-D, into the treasure house of his God, small g-O-D. And the Hebrew is exactly the same, Elohim. So if you've been in here before, you'll remember that we have this idea because of our English thinking that the word God only refers to the Creator, who is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present, the Creator of everything. But that is not what the word means. Our God, the true God, the Trinity God, that God is the Creator of everything, who has all power and all knowledge and is all present. But this word Elohim appears throughout Scripture many times in all sorts of ways, including, for example, right here. So you'll find this word Elohim being used by Samuel when Samuel is raised from the dead by the witch of Endor with Saul, for Saul. It refers to his disembodied spirit as an Elohim. You'll find demons being referred to in the Scripture, in the prophets, with this word Elohim. All Elohim means is a disembodied, or not disembodied, it could be disembodied, a spirit being that does not have a body, who has great power and authority. I didn't say all power. I didn't say all authority. I said great power and great authority. And this is going to become very significant in Daniel chapter 10. But that will be then. So obviously Nebuchadnezzar is attributing his victory, and we can see why he would, to his God. I'm going to take that God stuff, I'm going to put it in the house of my God. It's obvious why we do that. I think I have enough time to do this. I think I do. Why would God deliver Judah, Jerusalem, and the temple into the hands of God's enemies? Okay, this material here comes from a commentary by Walvoord, who is deceased now. He was the president of Dallas Theological Seminary. He wrote a really good commentary on Daniel, and this is one of those references that fell out of it. But number one, they had forsaken the law of God and ignored his covenant. And you can see in Isaiah chapter 24, verse 5, it specifically says, because they had transgressed the law, changed the ordinances, and broken the everlasting covenant. Now, I think sometimes in America, we might think we have a covenant with Israel. Let me tell you, no country, period, has a covenant with God the way that Israel has a covenant with God. Does not exist. Just completely, it's a joke. Okay? The covenant with people was given, even the new covenant, Jeremiah 31, verse 31, is given to Israel. It's Israel's covenant. The church is grafted onto Israel's covenant. If Israel has lost her covenant, the church has no covenant. Literally. So what covenant, how would this possibly relate to us? What covenants do we have? Well, we have personal covenants with God. And if Israel could break their covenant with God, we should be concerned that we not break our personal covenant with God. So yeah, this is very personal here. I'm not talking about the U.S. I'm talking specifically about you and me. That's who should be concerned. There's the relevance. It's very specific. And then we have marriage covenants. We could break those covenants. In Malachi chapter 2, verse 15, God says he's a witness against some people because they broke their covenant, because he was a witness at their wedding vows. He actually says that in Malachi 2:15. And then, to be frank, when we raised our children, whether we did it or not, but most of us did it, and we made this vow to raise our children to know the Lord. That is a covenant. These are the covenants and the kinds of covenants that we should be concerned with. Right? So this is significant. Then number two, you can see this is very devotional. It's like this book really gets devotional. Okay, they ignored the Sabbath day in their Sabbath year, Jeremiah 34. In Exodus, I didn't put this in there, but in Exodus 31, verse 13, Moses specifically says that the Sabbath is the sign of Israel's covenant. Okay, it's their covenant, the Sabbath. Now, that does not mean that God does not want us all to do something with the Sabbath. But the specifics of what he would do with Israel are not going to be the same as what he's going to require of all people. It's just not going to be the same, because he says in Exodus 31:13, the Sabbath is the sign of Israel's covenant. Okay, so, but the Sabbath does have a relationship to all of us. It has a relationship to creation. Right? Seventh day, God made the Sabbath. Before he gave the law, he established the Sabbath. In Exodus chapter 20, we got the Ten Commandments. One of the commandments is the Sabbath. And then, to be frank, the Sabbath is the only one of the commandments that addresses time. Does God care about our time? He does. And we could become a people who are so busy that we literally never have time for God. So I'll share with you something here that is not going to apply to anybody here, but y'all will appreciate it. I am always baffled by people, because you're all in church. See, you're giving God time, right? You're here. You're giving God time. I'm always baffled by people who think that they're going to go to eternity with God and never give him any time on this earth. What would make you think you would go to an eternal destiny with the Almighty if you can't even give him any time? It makes no sense. It's absurd. Well, Israel was violating her Sabbath. You don't have to light candles. It's a beautiful thing to do. You don't have to have do all the prayers that we do on the Sabbath. You don't have to do that. If you're Jewish, we do it. You don't have to do it. But God really wants time. That's the issue right there. Okay, number 3. Israel had gone into gross idolatry. Jeremiah 7 talks about the different idols. Well, the second of the Ten Commandments, you shall not make unto thee any graven image of anything that is in heaven above, on the earth beneath, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, suffering the sins of the fathers unto the children, to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy, chesed, loving kindness, to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. That's beautiful, isn't it? So God warns us about idolatry. And idols, in Deuteronomy 4:19, it tells Israel, don't serve the stars. Don't bow down to them. That second commandment that I just quoted, it's warning us, even if the things in heaven, thou shalt not make any graven image of things that are in the heavens above, even if it's in heaven. Things on the earth and things under the earth. This is one of the concerns from a Jewish person's perspective of what kind of theology we would have with communion. If the elements are actually something that we are bowing down to and treating as though it were the person of God, the doctrine of transubstantiation, or the doctrine of consubstantiation, either one of those, either it becomes the body and blood, or they're both the blood and the juice and the bread and the body. They're both there. What we have just done is and now we bow down and we treat this thing as though it actually were God. That's not okay from a Jewish perspective. Do you see the point? Sometimes I could do this way. I could draw a stick man on this piece of paper. And then I could say, imagine Jesus. This is my body, broken for you. Now, nobody's going to think that I was saying this is really me. You understand what I'm doing here? Okay? So I think we are at risk every day when I go for my prayer walks. And I'm very aware of this because I love looking up at the sky and the clouds and talking to God. But I'm very aware today, yesterday, I am not talking to that sun. I'm not talking, though I am inspired by the things in the heavens to worship God. I know He's the one that made those things. He's the one that made this communion cup, and I'm worshiping Him because He gave me a way to reach Him. But He is so much bigger than that. And if the Lord Almighty, if Yeshua Himself appeared in this room right now, we'd all kiss carpet. But bowing before a little cup and a little wafer is not the same as if He showed up in person. They're not the same. So we don't do idolatry. Number 4, there was horrible moral apostasy in Israel. Isaiah chapter 5, and so you go through all of this, so much of the scripture. They were stealing each other's property to join house to house, and I thought of that today, and I thought, what about this guy, Sam Bankman-Fried? He stole $10 billion. You know what I'm talking about, right? He's a Jewish guy. He's an embarrassment. What about the people who come to people's front doors and steal UPS packages? Right? I mean, from this side to here, thievery. And then the sin of revelry, Jeffrey Epstein. What about these people who are like parading immorality in our schools? I mean, this is like, we should be concerned. Why is abortion an issue? Because people want to protect the ability to be sexually immoral. That's what's driving it. Chapter 5, verse 18, the sin of lying. I'll just say politicians. Pick your favorite. And we vote for them. The sin of injustice, the court system. The sin of pride. Man, we all have issues here. I think of Muhammad Ali right there. I'm the greatest. He may have been at one thing, but he ain't the greatest. The sin of drunkenness, legalization of drugs. God says in Isaiah 5, verse 6, that He Himself is going to call a conqueror to conquer the land. In Isaiah 5:26, He, meaning God, will lift up a banner to the nations from afar, and He will whistle to them. He's going to whistle to Babylon and say, I can't whistle very good. Come here, Babylon, get those people. That's what Isaiah 5:26 is saying. But the other thing, the first 4 all from Walvoord. Number 5 is, I'm adding this. Israel was the chosen foundation for God's love to be offered universally. A sovereign God chose to deliver Judah, Jerusalem, and even the temple into the hands of God's enemies because God so loved the world so much that when Israel fell, it opened the door, and she didn't fall as to lose her Romans chapter 11, verse 1 said, did Israel fall and where she rejected, and he says, God forbid. He did not stumble. Romans 11:11 has Israel stumbled that they should fall? No, but did she stumble? Yes. And why is that good? Because the fact that she stumbled, not to fall, but the fact that she stumbled means that now God can give everybody salvation. So this is good. So this was God's means. We're going to stop right there, and we're going to pick it up with page 10 next time. And we're just getting there. We're just getting there. You're going to love chapter 2 because chapter 2 is all about dreams. You're going to love chapter 2. So.